Okay, now that we have our textures designed in Photoshop, we're at the point where we can import them into Vizrt Artist and begin our design process. Before we actually do that though, I just need to do a little organization here for our project. So what I'm going to do is go into the server, click on the P button or drag it down here. We're just going to call our new project here Design Tutorial 2. You can call it whatever you want. And since we're going to do something a little bit different with the concepts and variants in this tutorial, I'm going to add another project as a subcontainer or subfolder of this design tutorial folder. So I'll just click in there. Since it's highlighted, it should go in there. And I'm just going to call this concept equals blue, since we're going to make all of these graphics that we're designing here blue. And here you can see it's a subfolder. So this is where I'm going to start designing. So first step I'm going to do is come into our S tab or scene and create a new scene. I'm going to call this scene L3 and I'm going to call it variant equals blue. And this is where we're going to begin to design. So I'll click OK and here it tells you the name. I'll go ahead and double click on that scene now, and down here it tells us that it's open. Before we begin, I'm actually going to import all of those images that we made in Photoshop. So we can put them in either folder you want. I'm just going to put them right here in the Design Tutorial 2 folder. And I'll go into my I tab and over to my Import button here. And I had them on my desktop, so I'll just navigate to the folder. Our drop down here is set to Images. So here you see all the images that we have. And I'm just going to select the first one, hold down Shift, click, and then drag these right over into our window here. And it looks like we have everything that we need to begin. We also we'll also want some materials as well. So you can either create a new material by right-clicking in the M tab, and let's say we want a new blue material. I can click OK. So I'll just double-click it, and it will bring us up into the material editor here, and here we have a blue one. I can just hit save and close. Now you may have a couple of other materials scattered throughout your server here that you may want to use. So for instance, I have a couple of other materials here that I may want to use, and if you want, you can drag them into the folder that you're working on. So I'm just going to drag those materials into my blue folder here where my concept equals blue. So now we're actually ready to begin designing. So let's take a look at what we'll actually be designing here. I have a quick image of our lower third, and if I drag it into my background image, you see it's here made up of a couple of things that looks like a nagi. So this is where pretty much we're going to start. We're going to try and duplicate what we see here. To replace this background image, I have another image here in my Design Tutorial 2 folder. I just have a snapshot of a stadium here, and this can be used just as like a background reference or something for us. So I'm just going to keep this active for now within the scene settings. First thing I'm going to do is just go over and turn on my TA and SA, and this will guide us as to where we want. If we wanted to keep that lower third image as a reference, I could drag it into my foreground image here and then turn this off every time I want to take a look at it as well. So I'm going to leave that active for the moment. So first thing that I want to do is just going to start with a main group here. I'll drag a group down and just call this main. I'm going to go into my built-ins and I'm going to use a nagi to begin with. I'll drag the nagi down and I'm going to spread the width to maybe like 550, and let's start the height at about 35. I'm going to take my bevel down to 0 on each corner and use the stretch here and set that to about 60. I'm going to go into my server, into the M tab, and grab a blue material. So I'll just grab a dark blue material, maybe something a little bit darker, maybe black even. If I want to scoot this down, I can either scoot the whole main group down or the nagi. I'm just going to highlight the main group and use the position Y here to kind of position this down towards the bottom of the screen. So that's my first nagi. What I'm going to do is just build out by continuing to copy this. So I'm just going to copy that nagi down by holding down Control, clicking, and dragging. I'm going to go into the nagi editor here, and I'm just going to adjust the width a little bit less and the height down a couple of pixels as well, roughly around 30 maybe and 525. something like that. I'm going to copy it again, and by holding down Control, clicking and dragging. Each time I copy, I want to also move these up in Z position. So my second Nagi here, I'm going to highlight, go into the transformation editor, hold down Control, and just increase the Z position 0.1. And I'm going to do the same thing for this Nagi. I'm going to go into the transformation editor and increase the Z position to 0.2. I'm going to swap out this blue material, so I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to go into my images here, and I'm just going to drop the white box onto that. I'm going to go ahead and click on the white box, and to the mapping here, I'm going to set it. Now I'm going to do one more copy of this Nagi here, and this time we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to introduce you to inheritable images. So I'm going to come up into my images here. I'm going to drag the hexagon image onto this, and it replaces what we had before. So now I'm going to go into the mapping and change it to linear. I'm going to scale the linear mapping down a little bit to something like that. And I'm, again, just going to make sure that this is increased in the Z position as well. So I'm going to bring that up to 0.3. And now I'm going to kind of use this gradient to create some type of gradient along the hexagon image. So I drag the gradient image down as a standalone image. I'm going to take my Nagi and slide it as a subcontainer of that gradient image. I'm going to click on my gradient image to go into the image editor here. And here we have this thing called unit, which is inheritable. So I can turn on inheritable, and since it's my second image down, I'm going to click on 2, and now you can see how that kind of takes on the shape of this gradient. If I want to adjust it, I can click on the gradient image now and use the position, scaling, rotation to set this image however I want. I'm just going to place it somewhere around here. I'll just set it at its default value and use the position Y here to kind of make some adjustments. Again, if you want, you can always lower the opacity of it too. So I'm going to go into my container plugins, into the global folder, and use the alpha onto that gradient. So I'm just going to alpha down textured hexagon image right there. And now we have this white bar. If you want to get technical and go ahead and start renaming each one of these containers, which I highly suggest for organization reasons, we'll just call this BG1, and if we hit the down arrow, it will take you down to the next arrow. This will be BG blue, BG white, and we can just call this one BG text 1 and maybe BG text 2. Naming conventions are up to you. All right, so that one's all done, and if you want to get even more organized, I'm just going to highlight them all and group them into their own group, and we'll just call this one white bar. I'm going to close up that group, and I'm going to work on a new part of our lower third. And this part, as you can see when we come into our foreground image here and turn that on, is going to be this textured blue line at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and go into our primitives again. I'm going to use a Nagi. If I want to regroup this, I can. So this is going to be our bottom bar. And I'm going to spread my Nagi out, this time a little bit more than 550, so I'll go 650. And let's take the height down to 30. To take each one of our corners down to 0, so there's no bevel. And again, we're going to set the stretch to 60. We're going to go into the transformation editor, position the Y position here down below it. And let's just move the position X here so that the right sides of these lower thirds line up. Now I'm going to go ahead into my server and drop some type of image on it. I'm just going to use this gradient image here. I'm also going to go into my materials and drop a blue material on it. I'm going to go ahead and copy that Nagi. This time I'm just copying it up rather than dragging it down. I hold down Control, drag it up. I'm going to move it forward in Z position, so I can hold down Control for small increments. I'm going to move it up to 0.2. I'm going to go into my images, and I'm going to drag this split image down to replace the gradient. So I'm going to click on my split image here to go into the image editor. I'm going to scale it down on the single, on the X, and you can scale this down to whatever parameter you think looks good for you. So I'm just roughly going to do it around 0.20, let's say. And I'm going to rotate this till the rotation matches somewhat the angle of our Nagi. So our rotation of about 34 looks somewhat accurate. I can decrease the value or the height a little bit here. And I'm going to turn my bounding box off and TA and SA buttons just so we can see this a little bit better. I don't really so much like how hard it is, the edges, so I'm going to use the inheritable image again. So I'm going to use my gradient here. I'm going to drag this down as a subcontainer of my bottom bar container. I have a standalone image here with my grade container. I'm going to slide my Nagi as a subcontainer of that. I'm going to click on my gradient image. I'm going to turn on the inheritable and set the mapping here or unit to 2, and you can see how that immediately adjusts it. What we can do then is go into our gradient image and mess around with the settings here as to how we want it. So I'm going to rotate this 90 and then kind of see where we are with this image. So I'll scale this up a bit. On the Y, since I have it set to single, and what we can do is just kind of reposition this as to somehow or somewhere where you find it likely. Since we have an alpha channel here, you can kind of see how that's fading off in the middle there when I adjust the X position. So we can set this however we want. If we want to scale it out a little bit more to give us more of that alpha, then we can readjust it here. So roughly let's keep it there for now and see how that works as we progress. Again, if you want to slide this material off, you can, to give it a little bit less color or more color, or you can even replace the color with a new material. Doesn't matter if you drop it on the gradient and or the Nagi, either one will work. So before we go any further, remember to keep clicking save so that the scene saves as we go along. Now, last thing that I need to do here is to incorporate a logo. And if we take a look at our lower third here, we also have a little area here for our logo. So we'll go ahead and build that, and now add a new group here. We'll rename this group the logo group. We'll go into our built-ins. We'll grab another Nagi here, and immediately I'm just going to adjust my bevels down to 0 on each one and take my stretch to 60. I'm going to take my height down roughly around 50, let's say, and maybe the width will decrease that a little bit too. I'm going to move this over to the left side here and bring this up in Z position as well. Doesn't really matter where I'm placing it. I'm going to use 2 or 3 Nagis here to make this logo. So I'm just going to use this one as kind of a back plate. I'm going to drop a black material on it. Maybe we'll just make this one a little bit wider and higher. Then I'm just going to copy that Nagi up again by holding down Control, clicking and dragging. I'm going to increase the Z position, and I'm going to replace the color of it as well by dragging a new blue material on it. Now the blue material here just looks kind of flat, so I'm going to go ahead and add a gradient image to it as well. And I'm going to copy this Nagi once more. I'm going to move it forward in Z position. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And instead of using this gradient material, I'm going to replace that with the hexagon image. And we'll just scale this down a little bit, make sure it's locked to keep it even. And then once more, I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to get rid of that hexagon image. I'm going to get rid of the material. I'm going to replace it with our logo, or you may have your own logo. Again, I'm going to increase the Z position here. I'm going to come into my logo and adjust the scaling down so that it fits. Now, right now it's set to repeat, so it's repeating. However, we can change it to wrap under our image editor here where it says repeat or clamp. I can just set it to clamp and it no longer repeats. So roughly, here's our logo. Again, you can go ahead and make some tweaks further to it if you want. All right, so a couple more things that we want to do, and just to enhance a little bit. One, we need to add some text, and 2, we might want to further adjust these images or add some flares to it as well. Before we go further, what I'm going to do is just add the text. So I'm just going to create a new group here, and we'll just call this text. Now, I haven't imported any fonts into my area yet, so we have to do that by going to import, and we'll navigate to wherever your fonts are. Mine are on my C drive here, so I just have to navigate to Windows, Fonts, change my drop down here to Fonts, and then we're going to eventually get a list. So whichever fonts you want to use, you certainly can. I'm going to drag in just this Helvetica Roman here, right here. And you may have other fonts, again, scattered throughout your database too that you may want to use, so you can drag them in. So for instance, I have a couple other fonts that I may want to incorporate into this design as well, and I'm just going to go ahead and select those fonts and drag them into the folder where I'm currently working, just so I don't have to keep searching. Now if I click on my folder here, and in my F tab I have some fonts here that I want to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and just use this Helvetica font for our main font. I'm going to drag that down as a subcontainer of the text group. I'm going to increase the Z position. I'm going to go into my materials here, and I'm just going to drag a dark blue or a black material on it. I'm going to go into my font editor. First, in my basic tab, I'm just going to change this to texture. Now I'm going to scale it down to the height that I want it and just reposition it here on the white line. So something like that. We'll go into the text editor. We can say this could be your headline. Text goes here. We can change the name of our container here if we want. Call that one headline. I'm going to copy that container, that text. I'm going to go ahead and immediately change the name of this container to subline. And I'm going to go ahead and move this down to the Y position. I'm going to remove the black material by dragging that to the trash can. Now it's a white text. I'm just going to scale this down a little bit as well. You can change the text that is in there by going into the font editor, and we're going to type subline. Text goes in there. Now, though we do have a lot of room here for people to type, we just may want to go ahead and use that max size plugin to control the width of how much they can actually type. So I'll go into my tools folder here, look for the max size plugin, and drag this down onto my first headline text. I'm going to go into the max size editor. I'm going to decrease the X scale and the Y scale as well to about 0.7 or 0.6 roughly. I'm going to try to type in like 850 and see where that lands us as I come back into my text editor here and start typing. It goes beyond that a little bit, so 850 is too much. I'll type in 800, maybe 775. Maybe we'll try that. I'll come back into my text editor here as I type towards the end. It's almost there, a couple of pixels off. I'm going to leave it just so we can keep moving on. I'm going to just copy that max size down to my next subline. I'm going to decrease the scale of this on the X and the Y and briefly come in here and type and see where we reach the right side as it starts to shrink. So good enough for right now. Last couple of things that I want to do is just kind of tweak the design here. The striped line, I'm not so sure I like it on the right side, so I just may want to reverse that. And if you want to make changes on that, we just come into this gradient here, and we again can just kind of slide this left or right or slide it up and down to make subtle changes as to where this is going to land or how you want it to look. So I'm just going to save that briefly right now, and we're going to add a couple of more things here, and this time we're just going to add some flares to it. Now in your server you may have a couple of flares already imported and in your server that you could use. I've imported a couple of flares here from the starter toolkit, which is available on TootsGFX, and you can download that and have a couple of extra flares or something like that, or some images that you can start by doing these projects. So I have a couple of flares. I'm just going to slide these into my design tutorial folder here, and they're now available for us to use. First, since this is a blue, I'm just going to drag this blue flare down here. I'm just going to adjust the position of it here, and I'm going to bring it up in the Z position, and you can kind of see this flare. So if I scale it up, you can see what it looks like right there. I'm going to set the scaling to single. I'm going to spread the X scale out, and I'm going to decrease the Y scale. I'm going to put it right in the middle right now for now. And you can see as we adjust this position here, how it kind of affects the design of it. One other thing that we can do to enhance this flare is actually use a plugin. So I'll go into our built-ins and our container plugins into the global folder. I'm going to use the expert here to give it a little extra pop. So I'm going to click on the expert editor and change the render mode to add. And now you can see how that changes the flare a little bit. If we want to adjust it, we can place it wherever we want or scale it up to a little bit more to reveal more of the flare. So once you have that, I can just simply copy that one and place it somewhere else. Maybe we'll place this one along the top or so as well. So this lower third all set up, designed roughly. Next step would be to actually go ahead and animate it. And that's what we're going to do next. So go ahead and save your scene, and let's get ready to animate it.